Yes.
Good evening and welcome to everybody to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Mary Wheel, Chair of the committee. We're being streamed live on YouTube, and members of the public obviously are welcome to watch the meeting and listen to the discussions. I'd like to welcome everyone here in Committee Room 1 at Kensington Town Hall as well. Before we proceed, please can everyone make sure they've turned their mobiles off or onto silent. And we will start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in Grenfell. Thank you. I've received apologies from Councillor Claudia Claxton. Does anyone have any interest to declare under A2? No. A3, which is minutes of the previous meeting, may I sign them as a correct copy?
Agreed.
Right. Our first page.
Can I say something under the tracker, which has been attached to the minutes, I understand? I would just like to say thank you for the appearance of the report on the update and progress on the implementation of the budget directorate last year. An excellent report, and we'll come to it later, but thank you for doing it on the track.
Okay, so our first page of today is the annual complaints report, which gives an overall an overview of feedback really from our residents and users of our services. Very important, obviously, that the council encourages reporting and complaints, but then also those complaints are dealt with in a comprehensive manner and in a timely manner. And so I'd like to invite Sophie here, who's our Director of Customer Delivery, to introduce the report.
Thank you and good evening. I'll be brief and as soon as you've read the report and leave plenty of time for questions, which I'm sorry is what you prefer. I would say the headlines are that performance in terms of our responsiveness and timeliness in responding to complaints is not where we had hoped or wanted to be. So we see that we have a turnaround average time of 63% within the 10 working days for stage 1, when our target is 90%. So whilst that is an increase on last year, it's nowhere near the increase we wanted to see. We also are seeing more escalations to stage 2, which suggests that we're still not getting it right first time when responding to complaints when we receive them. And we also are seeing that an increase, and certainly compared with our performance compared to other authorities in terms of ombudsman cases, we've seen more upheld by the ombudsman than other authorities have. So there's clearly work for the organisation to do, and some of the recommendations we've made are set out in the report, and we'd welcome some input on those. But I should leave it there and take any questions that you have.
Thank you. Tony, is there anything, Joe, something you want to add by way of introduction? Or?
No.
Yeah, I can.
Okay, yes.
I'm happy to. I'm pretty sure I'm going to get a lot of questions, which is fine. Yeah, the performance in housing needs is a particular concern, and obviously it's not good at all. There are some issues. There are some factors which are out of our control, which has led to an escalation in complaints. So we had I think there's been a 63% increase or something like that in the volume of complaints received. The turnaround times is not acceptable. Myself and my senior manager take it very, very seriously. There are a number of issues in relation to the timeliness, but also the quality of the responses that we are issuing. But I suppose it's best if I just take questions and then just.
Thank you. Shall we start with Greg?
Thanks very much indeed, Mary. So I think that's probably a good place for me to start because Kojo knows I was going to question him. So I'm just wondering of the reasoning. Is it staffing numbers that the staff struggling with too big a workload, or is it staff training, or is it extra workload because the number of people requiring your services is noticeably up this year, or is it a combination of all of those, or have I missed something?
It is a combination of some of those. I'm not going to use staffing numbers as an excuse because I think we have got sufficient resources in the service to actually deal with the volume of complaints and members' inquiries we receive. We do receive a similar volume of members' inquiries as we do complaints. I think that there's definitely something about changing our culture and our attitude towards responding in time and actually prioritising complaints. Some of it is about training. So we have had a turnover of staff. There are some inexperienced staff who are learning about legislation. So some of the ombudsman cases we have lost is failure to issue a personalised housing plan, which is commonly known as a PHP. That's a legal requirement. So we have had some service redesign to actually train staff and streamline our processes so that we can issue documents in a timely fashion. There is something about the way in which we respond to complaints, because there are some staff who don't actually contact the resident to actually, once the complaint has been submitted, to find out what the issue is, so that we can just respond in a timely fashion. There is also something about us being proactive, and because we are a service that is trying to manage demand, and we have had a 16% increase in homelessness, which has naturally led to more inquiries. If we are informing residents that we do not have a duty towards them, that will attract complaints. However, I think that a lot of it is that we don't actually respond when somebody actually raises a query, and I think that generates more complaints. So some of it is about just managing the casework in an appropriate manner so that we can just respond in time.
All right, thank you. I mean, there's obviously a much deeper discussion to do that, and other people will have questions. One other question on housing, it might not be the housing management moved to iCasework in September. I'm just wondering how that's going. Something we talked about last year.
Yeah, it's going well. So I'm really pleased that we've managed to do that. I remember taking feedback from the Commission last year exactly about that. So it's going well. We had some teething problems, of course, with data in the first couple of weeks, but it means that in future reports, we'll be able to get a much stronger analysis across that service as well. So I'm glad to say that's been delivered.
Yeah, thanks. So where will I start? On page 22, it refers to the unreasonable or vexatious complaints policy being amended. And I was wondering where can we find that? And also it speaks, I think, to a broader question about where in general can members and also residents find all the council's policies. Because it's great that we have a policy, but it'd be nice to understand a bit more about that. And that was a small point. Again, the 63% increase in housing needs, I think, is concerning. I sort of wonder aloud whether it's a coincidence that I think there were 2 posts in housing needs cut last year. Now we have an increase, and also, as you say, Kojo, about the turnover of staff does make things difficult, and possibly that may have something to do with it. But I was looking at in the Ombudsman information, where it starts on page 47, and it gives some quite interesting detail on the types of complaints that you are receiving. And I'm wondering how can that learning be embedded in terms of improving service delivery? because some of the things, it's not just about the loads, it's about considering health needs and so forth. And this certainly is in keeping with what I see in my casework. So how can this information be used to actually improve service delivery?
Let's start with the website. That can clear that one up. So that we do have a web page on the website for complaints, which allows residents to submit their complaint online if they wish, or gives a number for them to phone us. And the policies are held there so that residents can see them. I can send you a link if you'd like to.
Okay.
But the fact that Claire couldn't find it means that it's not searchable properly. So that, you know, you should have been able to find it straight away on the website,
Yeah.
shouldn't you?
Because otherwise it becomes a member inquiry, which is more work for people.
I'll take that away, thank you.
But I think that's not just this policy, it applies to all policies, so that's important for the council to consider. And then in the action plan, so I'm looking at page 68. There are a couple of things that are concerning to me, which again reflects concerns arising from my own casework. Some residents say there is a fear of reprisal and that the council needs to address resident sensitivity around using the complaints process. So I'm really pleased to see that's in the action plan, that's being addressed. And I'm really pleased to see that it's come before the committee as well. And going back to the questions, we don't have data from housing management on the escalations.
Housing management and the escalation.
Because of the differences, the changeover.
Yes, that might be. Yeah,
So
we can provide
yeah,
that.
so we can't really look at that. And I'm just wondering where delays are at the stage one, that's going to lead to more escalations. And so we can't really see the full picture there. I think that's me.
Thank you. Have you, we haven't responded to
So, councillor, in relation to the increase, I think that we do have to acknowledge that there has been a significant increase in homelessness nationally and particularly in London. So, as I said earlier, we did take 16% more homelessness applications last year. This year, so far, we've taken 17% more applications than we did for the corresponding period last year. In terms of the volume of complaints, I was just doing some analysis, and so far, year to date, we've to the end of October, we have received 19% less complaints from April to October than we received in the entirety of last year, which means that we're definitely going to have more complaints this year than we did last year. There is an accommodation crisis. We are struggling to find accommodation for residents. Some of the complaints is about failure to provide suitable accommodation. And through the conversations that we've had during casework, that is a particular challenge for us in this authority. So those are the ones that are out of our control to a certain extent. The ones that are within our control about lack of action on cases, failure to issue personalised housing plans, failure to communicate with the residents in time, failure to actually respond to complaints in time. We are learning from the complaints in the ombudsman cases. Sophie's team does provide us with the ombudsman decisions in full. We now have a full-time senior listening experience officer in the team who leads on weekly or fortnightly meetings, so which each service area, to not only challenge us on completing the complaints in time, but also learning from the issues that we've obtained from the complaint responses and the ombudsman cases. And I think the big thing for us is about the training. So we are embarking on a comprehensive training program for the majority of staff within housing needs. It started at the end of October. It's going to last about 6 months. Some of it is going to take some time. I am confident that we are going to make the changes that are needed, but we are going to see a few more difficult cases. I have to be honest about that. And I think it's down to us to show that there's improvement. We're not expecting us to jump from 53% stage 1's completed in time and 33% stage 2's completed in time to 90% overnight. But we have to show improvement and we're working towards them.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to work for if that's all right.
Thanks, Mary. There's at the end of the paper, there's some examples of complaints which have been upheld by the Ombudsman, and I completely understand why they're anonymised, but I think it's hard for me at least to get to the bottom of those complaints based on the examples there. But I just want to know, with serious complaints that are upheld and complaints that are upheld by the Ombudsman, are we doing sort of full root cause analysis of those to prevent them from happening again? And do we have a way of flagging when a serious complaint is upheld a second time? So we've got recurring incidents of the same complaint being upheld.
Yeah, sorry, do you want to go?
Yeah, shall I? So whenever the answer to both those questions is yes. Perhaps the second one is more complex than the first. But whenever we have a finding by the Ombudsman, we always have to agree a plan of action with them, which we will always make sure includes training and learning and understanding of the root cause. So I can think of 2 or 3 that I know personally over the past 6 months where the plan of action that we've agreed with the Ombudsman includes training. There'll be an apology letter and there will be usually some follow-up by the manager. And the head of service.
It's not just about remedying that particular person's issue, it's about making sure it doesn't
absolutely. In terms of analysis, so we do the analysis, I suppose because there are fewer Ombudsman cases, it's easier to look at them and kind of understand what the trends are. So we do that analysis and we would look for any trends across different themes. I haven't really identified strong themes to date, but we would look for those. But given that there's an action plan with each Ombudsman case as it closes, we tend to kind of make sure that action plan is embedded, and we have to follow up with the Ombudsman over the next 3 months or so to confirm all those actions have been taken.
Okay, and then also from an HR perspective, presumably it is tracked if there are particular members of staff who had complaints were held against them on more than one occasion.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I would just add, for a few of ours, there have been a couple of things. And what the Ombudsman does is they will advise that we remind staff, for example, if there's a failure to do something specific in relation to legislation, they will ask us to provide information that we reminded staff of what it is we need to do. So I think one of them actually mentions it. So we do that, and then we routinely pick up with staff the issues if we identify that they're happening again. But the ones with the suitability of accommodation, those ones are recurring. And we have to try and find a way of finding suitable accommodation specifically for the ones with accessible accommodation. Because there is a service delivery point, but also there's a financial element to it as well.
Lucy.
You've answered a few of my questions, but just starting on page 31, where you talk about social care and children's social care, and you're aiming to respond ideally in 10 days, and you'll see stats here saying 49% of adult social care is 10 working days, 33% 20 working days, then children's social care 43 and 29. That feels quite far off what our aim is. I mean, I'm assuming the length of time is due to the complex cases, but even so, I think when you have an aim for applying in 10 days, it's with those really sensitive cases, which more often than not they're going to be. I feel like me quite distressing for residents, and what your sort of plans are to at least pull that up slightly, even if
Absolutely, and it's a discussion we actually had at the when we looked at the deep dive in the executive management team. So there is a separate statutory process for children and adults, and it's set out in 4.2 of the report, which means that under their complaints process, they have a much longer timescale because of the complex nature of a lot of their complaints. But what we have established is that wherever possible, we should still be aiming to respond within the council's the council's timelines.
Yeah.
But there will be cases that are more complex that require a longer period, and so that's why that potential is offered by the statutory process, with a recognition of the fact that those are much more complex cases. But the organisation has committed that it wants to still respond to as many as possible within the corporate timelines that we've agreed.
And then I was just going to flag where you say in 4.13 that you're facing challenges in terms of staffing changes, but also a long-term vacancy of the team leader role within customer experience. I was just wondering how long that's been and whether there's an update on it, if it is causing challenges.
So we had a senior customer experience officer who was responsible for delegating the complaints and following up on the actions that we were supposed to do. Unfortunately, that person left about a year or so ago. And we had a couple of temps in the post, but they didn't last long. So there was a vacancy for a sustained period of time. I am pleased to say that we did recruit to the post successfully, somebody from Sophie's team. It's good in that sense, because we've got a corporate complaints eye within housing needs that is helping, and already we've seen an impact with the quality of reports we're receiving, because the data is key and queen as far as I'm concerned in this situation. So it has had a positive.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question on one question I made. Bottom of page 46. The two linked cases to do with complaints on disturbances of the resident near a hospitality business, which we get in Redcliffe. Just wanted to clarify a couple of questions on this one. Because we've got a licensing and streetline enforcement team within the council, how does it get to the stage where someone is going to the ombudsman rather than asking us to resolve it first? And then secondly, there are payments made to the resident here, which seem to be money from the council. But of course, this is a licensed premises, which must be paying us money to get its licenses. So I just wanted to get some understanding as whether there's a fine on the business if we're now having to pay out money because there's some complaints gone wrong. And then the final thing, which I thought was a little bit bizarre in the final sentence, the ombudsman said if the resident has cause to complain again, that it will be investigated by officers who have not previously had direct dealing. So why would the ombudsman be asking that the resident's going to complain again if they've already had two complaints upheld? What are we doing to stop that from happening? And what is the interface between licensing enforcement and the complaints team to make sure that we're preventing this thing? So the resident can come to the council first or going to the ombudsman.
I know this case very well. The findings of the ombudsman in this case were that the organisation and the services in question had not properly accepted the residents' complaints, has been somewhat dismissive in the way they took those complaints and then investigated them, and that therefore that the resident suffered distress as a result of that. And there were some other elements that came to light that that would have added to that distress. And as a result, the resident has completely lost confidence and trust in the council to consider fairly and openly a complaint, which is why they went to the ombudsman, because they just didn't trust the council officers to look at it without bias. And of course, the ombudsman found reason to accept that. And so because of that, to provide the resident with some more trust and confidence, the agreement is should they ever in the future have cause for any complaint, they could be reassured that those same officers would not investigate it, so that he wouldn't feel that there was any bias in that decision. And the compensation is payable by the council because of the distress that the case caused him and the way it was investigated and handled. So that wouldn't be recharged to the business. It's not a business issue. It was the way the council dealt with the complaint that the resident submitted about the operation of a local business.
And just finish that off, because I'm just trying to get some clarity. We obviously have as I understand it, quite a large number of people in the council's enforcement teams and the licensing teams. What did they not do that led to the complaints in the first place?
I think if I was to simplify, I would say they did not, when I say they didn't take the complaint seriously, they didn't respond fully and openly and transparently to challenges that were raised about whether the council's policies were being followed by this business. And as the complaint grew and the resident became more frustrated, they became more dismissive and felt that it was just someone who had a personal issue with their neighbour. So that was the issue. I don't know, it was that capacity. It was more about that the officers, I think, had reached a conclusion in their mind when didn't enter into that investigation with an open mind in terms of what was happening. And that became evident in the way then they corresponded with the resident.
Thank you. One. After this follow off from this, what happened to the officers?
So training and the matter was referred to HR.
And my question is, have you looked? I'm going back to the increasing number of complaints and not reaching our target. Have you looked at the culture of people responding or taking on the complaints? Because I get the feeling we have two worlds, that before COVID and the after COVID. So in the after COVID world, a lot of people work half the time from home. Do you think that has an effect on the way people are responding and maybe on the way people are communicating with fellow colleagues? When in the past you could just pull the chair and sit down and talk to someone. Now you have to call them Zoom, their own team or whatever.
Yeah. Yes and no. I think that there is definitely an element of remote working having an impact on the way in which we can manage the service and manage things. We have got a lot of staff back into the office. And to be honest, we do get a lot of information from Sophie Service about complaints and ombudsman cases. And I just think that we just need to just take ownership and responsibility and then just respond, because the fact of the matter is that if you are if you're having regular contact with the resident on a case, it's highly unlikely they're going to be making complaints anyway, because you're having that regular communication with them. I think that what has had more of an impact is definitely the increased demand, and definitely staffing changes within the service. But I think that the managers have enough communication with the staff, whether they're in the office or at home, to deal with the complaints within a reasonable period of time. So I don't think that would be a reason for us to say that we can respond to it.
In the context of high demand, and in the circumstance where nomination has to be used to place somebody in a registered provider, housing association, whatever, how much quality assurances are made by the nomination process that the accommodation is suitable and appropriate? I'm thinking here that the responsibility for maintenance would be the registered providers and not ours.
Yeah.
But how much of a responsibility do we take to ensure that that is back in place?
Yeah, so we have a relationship with all of the registered providers in the borough, where we've got a certain percentage of nominations which come to us each year. And we've got an agreed standard in relation to what a property would be before we actually offer it to a resident. When we offer the property to the resident, whether it's council or housing association, the resident has an opportunity to actually review the property. And if they've got any concerns about the standard of the property, they can raise them with us, and we can liaise with the registered provider. If between us we think that the property is suitable, then the resident has a statutory right to request a review of that accommodation. So what we encourage them to do is accept the offer and request a review, because that way, if they accept the offer, even if the review doesn't come in their favour, they still have a property for them to return to. But in terms of the standard of the accommodation, there's a statutory framework in relation to what is suitable, and then there's an agreed process between us and the providers as to what is suitable.
Yeah, I think this business of culture and communication transparency in those processes, I think you've implied that's all being reviewed. It's obviously I can't mention it as the case, except to say that the accommodation in one case was not suitable.
Okay.
They were encouraged to accept I think they misunderstood the fact. And that they thought that if they were going to be accepting it, that they would have no ability to in reality, to review it later. But I think it's a difficult one to communicate to residents. I think it needs further work on communicating to residents, because that, in this case, did actually occur to a complaint.
Councillor Pascal, I can look into that particular case if you need more details. I'll come back
to
to
take it offline.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Sure. I just want to make sort of two quick observations, and one is that we haven't really talked about environment and communities, but they've got a very significant rise in complaints going to stage 2. It'd be interesting at some future point to understand why. But then also that home care complaints have gone down, which is a welcome trend, actually. I want to observe a sort of overall thing about this, and that is that I can clearly see, I think we all can, the aspiration in here, particularly to learn from complaints and to deal with them in a timely fashion and to get it right first time. There's a very long list of recommendations in each of the first position, because after all, if our aspiration is to be the best council, this certainly is not indicative of us going in the right direction. There's a long list of aspirations. I get the feeling that you're trying to pull lots of levers and you're not getting much response from the department, and that for all the good, whatever, you're just not getting the buy-in around the council that you need, and that may be unfair, but that's what shines through to me from this report. And so I'm wondering about, obviously this is of concern to Maxine, who's here, and to Johnny in his portfolio, and I wonder if you ought to perhaps be, and perhaps you do already, be seeing these figures on a monthly basis from now on, because if this trend keeps going like this year, you really want to know sooner rather than later. Because really we don't want to be in the same position this time next year. Even if it's steady state, that's not good enough, is it? It's actually got to go seriously into reverse. So that would really be my observation about this report, that you need more buy-in from the rest of the council to get this right. And how we get that, it's Maxine and Johnny and Elizabeth and your responsibility. But Claire, what do you want to say?
I mean, just have one extremely quick question, which I forgot to ask earlier, which is complaints about council policy, which obviously are not included in here. I'm just wondering what mechanism is there for ensuring that the learning from those complaints can be used in future policy and in policy making across the council?
Well,
Might be too general a question.
No, that seems to do after saying that.
Let Sophie come in, although I'm happy to do this with me.
Yes, so it's so on that split, there was something I wanted to say about the overall position, but on corporate, it's a good question, customers, and it's standard for a corporate complaints policy not to have complaints about policy, because essentially when policy is made, and you consult on it, that's the point at which you take the feedback on it and you set the policy. So that's a common approach from any organisation, is not to have complaints about corporate policy. I mean, essentially, if we get member inquiries about issues to do with corporate policy, then those will get raised through the kind of democratic processes. Individual complaints, what we do is we track the fact that we don't, because you've got a number of complaints that have been about policy. So I suppose the question just for your services, Sophie, is what happens to those? Do they go to the service, and does the resident get some sort of feedback, even if it's not, even if it's not under the complaints process?
Yes, and they would be handled outside of the complaints process, which means that we wouldn't have a record on our system of what responses were made. That is something that we could review to make sure that we keeping track of those wider wider issues. So that's probably something for us to take away in terms of how we track those with the same level of scrutiny that we apply to formal complaints and sit within the policy.
Thanks. I'm particularly interested in how the learning from
Yeah.
whatever is in those complaints can be used.
Thank you. And Maxine, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just an overall point, which is to completely agree with you as chair that this is not acceptable. There are various factors which are outside of our control, and Kojo's outlined some of those. But what is within our control is being able to respond within the timeframe set out by our own policy. And what this report demonstrates is that we haven't done that. So I'm afraid that the picture is not yet improving. I mean, obviously, it's a tiny improvement on last year, but only tiny. I remember it was my first scrutiny meeting, just the day after I started. You had the complaints report last year when it was 60%. It's now 63%. It can't be in the 60s this time next year. We cannot see this position again. So you have my commitment that there is there is going to be a much greater focus on complaints themselves and just our hygiene and our performance on complaints, but also with the learning from complaints. Just picking up the point about environment and community, so obviously you don't, Kojo came from housing needs and his colleagues are here as well to hear your feedback. Environment and communities, the feature there, so the ones that went to the Ombudsman were about outdoor dining, and they were essentially not, what the Ombudsman's finding was about, or sort of outdoor rowdy behaviour outside a hospitality venue. The Ombudsman's finding was that the council had not used all its powers, and that it had stuck to one bit of what it was doing, but it hadn't, for example, in one of them considered waste disposal properly. And so it was not a kind of whole. It wasn't a thoroughgoing finding of fault, but it was a finding of fault in certain areas, which suggests that we're being a bit too blinkered in our approach to the complaints. And if anyone is interested specifically in the Ombudsman complaints, you can go on the Ombudsman's website, both the Housing Ombudsman and the Local Government Ombudsman, and just put in Kensington and Chelsea, and all of the findings from the last year pop up, and they are so it will get better. Is my short version of that.
And just to point out that the adult social care produces their own annual report, and that's something that perhaps ought to go to Lucy's committee, or already does go to Lucy's committee. So I think our summary is that we're looking forward to better figures next year, that we are concerned by the ones of this year. Claire's raised a point about learning from policy challenges as well. And you've heard all the concerns of the committee. So thank you very much for coming and giving us such a good introduction and so many good responses to our questions. Thank you. So our next report is, which I like to think of as good. Very, very important paper on changing systems, which we all know is I'll let Debbie score off the break. So, Debbie, do you want to give us all these skills an introduction?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this report is the first of a regular set of update reports dealing with the new ERP system, which is the Enterprise Resource Planning System. The system we've chosen is Oracle, will replace the current arrangements we have with Hampshire. The system we use in Hampshire at the moment is SAP. So in layman's terms, it is around the HR and the finance systems that we use as a council. If you remember, we went to leadership team back in February and we were able to implement the Oracle ERP system. What we've done since then is we've onboarded the systems integrator that we said we needed to work with us, and that is Scrutiny, and we've onboarded that is version 1, and we've onboarded the business integrator, which is Scrutiny. We've also brought on board a program manager who's worked on these kinds of projects elsewhere in London and also further afield. So he's an experienced program manager. We've got a go live date of October 2024. And what you've got in this report is a bit of an update on the systems integrator, the business integrator, The fact that we've got our own staff who we've moved into this project as well. So some of our staff are 100% dedicated to this project to make sure we give it the resources it needs. And then you can see at section 6, there's an update of one of the different work streams. So finance, technical, which is the DD&T, the RT side of things, HR, which has got a number of work streams, and communication and engagement, particularly important, and particularly important with our buy services as well. Because they will continue with their phone arrangements, but some of their staff have to use our new Oracle system as well. And then you can also see the governance. So we've got project governance around all of this in place, and a timeline. And then towards the end of the report, we recognise some risks, and you can see the budget that was agreed at the start when we went through the integration of this project. So I'll stop there and probably take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, and else, I'm going to go down the other way this time. So Will, so look on one of us have to wait so long.
Okay, I have to declare an interest in the sense that I've got some stars from the last 2 times we implemented these kind of systems, one of which was much more successful than the other. Thank you, Debbie, for that. But part of the price we paid for that is that we took on board a very tightly defined system and didn't have much ability to change outside it. I think our sense in this case, we're going back to something that's more responsive to the system from use. We'll have more capacity. The 2 sides to that are, do we understand the complexity of implementing this thoroughly? And secondly, what contingencies do we, in terms of timing, do we have around the implementation?
Okay, so yes, I think we do understand fully the system. We spent a lot of time looking at it. As you say, it will give us the flexibility to be able to have finance and HR running as we, the borough, want it, rather than the constraints that we currently have in the partnership arrangement. In terms of timing, we're currently still in a partnership agreement with Hampshire. We've already spoken to Hampshire, and in hopefully the unlikely event that we don't meet October, they will continue the service until such time as we bring the new service online, whether that would then be December or April the following year. So we've got those contingencies and agreements in place.
But if we did have that delay in handover, we would then have a delay in the extra capability and some flexibility in terms of business transformation. So
we would have a short delay.
Yes, but it links into other things that are going on, if you like, under Maxine's broader arrangement with regard to transformation in the council. So I think if there are going to be any delays, that the implications of any delay need to be fed into other pieces of work as well.
Well, as you alluded to in point 11, there are risks, and a lot of them you have had mitigation for them. But which risk worried you, and what are you doing to relieve yes, worries?
I think data is our biggest risk. So, and what I mean by that is our data is currently held by Hampshire in the arrangements we have with them. We have to get that data from Hampshire into our new system, and that data is absolutely vast, and we'll need some cleansing as well to move from one system to another system. So there are lots of conversations going on at the moment with Hampshire County Council about how we do that and the processes we need to put in place. And there's lots of conversations going on with our own digital team as well, what they can do to make sure that we get that data into the right place. And then there's an added complexity around data, which is the Metropolitan Police data requirements that we hold data. And you'll see at one of the risk points, risk point D, that we recognise that. And actually we have had conversations with the police service and with Hampshire, but data is our biggest risk on that.
I think it is just in terms of mitigation. We're lucky that we've got both finance and HR staff that we knew before. That when this will be our 3rd system, so they know our data inside out, and also in DDAT, in ICT, how current data sets will map over to the new system in Oracle. So we are lucky that we've got that wealth of experience.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Yeah, so just following up Waller's question, it's good to see that you've got your 5 risks there in section 11. I'd quite like to understand, you've hinted as it with 1 or 2 of them that you've been asked about specifically where each one of them sits in terms of its likelihood of occurrence and its impact should it materialise. And therefore, if you have that data, it can inform a red and a green status for each of the risk. Have you done that work?
Yeah, because of the why don't we suppose with all of that mapped out on it?
Because I sort of find that's with the project, that's probably the helpful place to start, looking at to see where the risks are sitting. And so how's it going? And from that point of view, where do these 5 sit in terms of red and green?
So there is a mixture. I think data is red at the moment. That's the biggest risk, as you say. And there's a couple on here around data. And in fact, E as well, the middleware solution is also related to data. So C, D and E will relate to data. B, which is the target operating model, I think that is green. That's okay. We know how we're going to operate the systems as we go forward. So this is particularly around bringing in house some of the services like payroll, some of the payment of invoices as well, and some of the recruitment processes. And then A again is around data. So that, as you can see from those 5, is data. That's our data
Focus. But second question is the flip side of opportunities. To what extent do you think there might be an opportunity to sell access to this to other authorities once it's working? Is that something that you're looking at or have an aspiration to do?
It wouldn't be within our gift as such. Most local authorities have their own systems and services. Those authorities that were in shared arrangements have tended to move away from that. So Oracle is already present across 12 London boroughs. What this might give us the opportunity to do, if we had to stop with that, is to sell our services back to schools. When we joined the agreement with Hampshire, we could no longer provide payroll services to the schools in the borough or to some of the charities, and that was a shame for us because lots of schools buy HR services at the moment. So that will give us an opportunity to do that. So we probably won't do that immediately on point to go live. We want to make sure we access it via Hampshire for whatever reason. We're pretty confident that we will have a full data set here stored somewhere. And we're working through that at the moment in terms of data retention. But it would be extremely unlikely that there was any piece of data that we couldn't recover.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. And then in sort of reading this paper, I looked up articles on reasons ERP transformations fail. And there's a pretty unanimous agreement that the main reason is you don't get enough buy-in from senior management across the organisation, that they see it as just an IT project and it's not one of their top priorities. Can you reassure us that for all the people right up to director and exec director level, this is one of their top priorities?
Yeah. So really good point. That is one of the reasons it fails. We recognise that. So what you'll see here is there isn't actually anybody from IT here. So Debbie and I are the senior responsible officers jointly, leading it from the 2 services that will use this system. Mike Curtis is the sponsor for the project, and we've already had many a conversation with EMT. And we actually had Oracle come in and speak to JLT a couple of weeks ago about the system to make sure we have all of their buy-in as well. And we've got people coming up in next week to talk to our senior management team as well. And then the other thing we are doing is we've got a communications group with Westminster Council, and we've got Hammersmith and Fulham involved as well, and where we've still got or tri-borough services. So we're making sure that we try and communicate everywhere with everybody. The other thing that makes these systems fail is people wanting to adapt the system. So our big mantra throughout this is adopt, don't adapt. So actually this system is 99.9% probably take out the box and use. You shouldn't be having to adapt it for your own need, and that's where other councils have also gone wrong quite recently. And every time you make an adaptation, You've then got to keep that adaptation up to date. Every time there's a patch or something rolled out to the system, it doesn't just roll out automatically if you've adapted that system. So there's two big things which we recognise. I'm not saying we've conquered them both fully yet, but they're really on our radar. And we're continuing to have those conversations throughout the project.
Thank you. Lucy, did you have a question?
Yes. Mine's just more one out of intrigue and understanding this, because forgive me if it's something that's well known. What if it sounds like a huge project doing this? What is there any particular reason why the council's chosen to move from the system they're currently using? Because obviously we've heard about the opportunities and the risks involved, and just understanding why there was that move.
So we've been in a partnership arrangement with Hampshire, with other boroughs, with 8 partners. As that partnership has matured, we're really restrained by it. So they do everything vanilla primarily, which means we don't have any say in how we want reports or we want data to be processed. Some of their partners are police and fire and county councils, and therefore they have a different type of workforce to a London borough as well. So it really just has come to the point where, as an organisation, we can't move forward with that flexibility and to be able to give our managers the proper empowerment to manage their finances and HR processes correctly.
To some extent, Hampshire was an emergency landing, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it's essential that we want.
Yeah, no, I was just interested.
Good. I just wanted to ask this, in 6A, it talks about one strand having slipped only, planning and forecasting. I just want to ask how significant that was. It doesn't give them much. It's not progressing. It's the only one that's not progressing to timetable well.
Yeah, so what we recognised is we couldn't do everything at once. So that was the one that we could move at that point in time. It is now progressing. I mean, I think at the moment we still feel it will be on schedule at the end. But it was just recognised from us that not everything is going quite according to the original timetable, but that we're keeping a close eye on how things are moving around.
Question is, I mean, in essence, of my earlier question, I was also looking for what the understanding of critical path was, because there's not one strand of project. There's several parallel strands, but there'll be a critical path. Do you feel the critical path is being identified and acted upon, and the contingencies built in not to hold the whole process up?
Yeah, I think so. Our program manager, who I referred to before, is very experienced and has worked with other places, so is highlighting that to us. And our systems integrator and business integrator partners as well recognise critical paths from projects they've done previously. We have a long way to go yet. We've still got sort of 11 months to go, so we need to just keep an eye on it.
My long experience partly here is that if you're not ahead, you're behind. Simple as that.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think the committee recognise how extremely important and difficult this implementation is, and thank you very much for a really comprehensive report. I think there are obviously a few little concerns around whether there's enough contingency, but I think you've responded about what your mitigation plans for that are, which is to continue. You very frankly told us about the issues around data. So I think really the committee thanks you, and would like to keep an eye on this probably in another sort of 6 to 8 months or whatever is a suitable time frame.
So we've said we will commit them quarterly.
So that's really very helpful, and thank you very much. Thank you for all the hard work that we know goes into this. And diligently. Good. Swiftly on to paper A6, which is Cedric. So who's going to? Welcome to the
Can I say something before Claire starts, just as a typo? Under 1.2, because the procurement report was withdrawn after the publication date, the
should say A8, not A9.
should I say A, not A9, 1.2.
Okay, I'll break my vow of silence so far this evening, which is this paper. I think the first thing to say is there's an extremely challenging financial context that we're operating in. You'll all be familiar with it to an extent, but obviously that includes persistent high inflation, which, for example, affects our borrowing and contract costs, and some of the wider trends that we're seeing in terms of demographic pressures and kind of services where needs are becoming more complex, or we're seeing more people that need to access those services. In terms of the budget gap that we've got over the medium term, it's 32 to 42 million pounds, which is quite substantial. It's probably at the top end of that estimate. That's probably higher than almost any other time since I've been a councillor, which I think again speaks to the scale of the challenge. And set against that, we have to balance our commitments to become the best councils, become greener, safer and fairer, and to be competent and caring in everything that we do. And so this budget represents our efforts to bridge between the challenges that we face and the opportunities that are set out in the council plan. I'm pleased that although we've had to make some very difficult decisions, and that includes £12.2 million of potential savings that we're consulting on, we're also able to invest in resident priorities. So, for example, start weekly bin collections are invested in parks, our more CCTV potentially in some of our sites. And I've been to the control room with Kim, Emma, and Gemma for the past few months. We've got things like our campaign to buy the Notting Hill Police Station, which shows that our ambition is undimmed. And where there's a need, we are happy to go the extra mile to support our residents. And also things like new homes. We had a great moment today, I think, the opening of the Dewar Street development, which Kim and Sof went to and I've already visited. So I think we can be really proud of the progress that we're making. And also, I think in the context of that kind of competent and caring piece, we are still, despite the challenges, able to invest in things that are visible, high volume services. So, for example, there is growth in the budget to modernise our parking services. I know that's a service that a lot of our constituents rely on. It's something that I think is absolutely critical. And I think where it's even more powerful is that it shows that where there are opportunities to digitise and modernise and transform our services, we're taking those opportunities up and trying to make sure that the resident and the customer experience is improved. And if I turn to kind of how we're showing that not only do we want to be effective in the way that we deal with things, we also want to show a human face and be caring and empathetic towards that as far as we possibly can. The cost of living continues to be a major issue for a lot of people. I hope that with a bit more notice than last year, I can bring forward some plans which are being developed at the moment around the cost of living. We are also, though, I think, and this is a great thing, continuing to invest in our voluntary sector. We value the partnership working that exists in this borough. We value the contribution made by our communities to this place. I think the diversity of those communities is a great strength for us. And so this is hopefully a budget that represents a modern, progressive, compassionate and changing council as we set about the next 12 months and also the challenging medium-term context that we're in.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we're queuing up questions. Now, we're bearing in mind that we are also going to have a look at the very specific aspects in select committees later. That shouldn't bar you from asking questions here, but just remember that you can go into much more detail in your own select committees with the relevant officers present. But please don't let that make you hold back. So I'm going to start with Lucy. Going to work around.
I actually just wanted to ask a question on which I think I have about before, but whether in terms of the years ahead, there's any clarity on this central government and local health ICP grants.
No, there isn't.
So just add to that, we've got the autumn statement.
Yes,
And then the
settled hopefully before Christmas. There may be some news in that.
Yeah.
At this moment in time, no.
No, it's just like that. I mean, given the impact it would have on local government, I just find it staggering that they can kind of just.
Our assumptions for future years, and when I say future years, I mean 2025 and 26 and beyond, assume that the current funding that we received for 23, 24 and 24/5, so 2 years worth of social care funding, fall away, because it was only given for 2 years, and that's around £8 to £9 million funding. So the moment that we've been really prudent, I think that will fall away. That's why the gap is big.
Yeah.
But the range that we've expressed shows that we recognise that there's uncertainty around that. And what you're describing is exactly an example of the kind of challenging climate that we're in politically as well as economically here.
Yeah.
It's difficult to plan with that kind of uncertainty.
Thank you.
Sorry, your first question, page 109, 14.13, about the 8 million set aside for pandemic recovery and 3.6 million sort of remains available for allocation. I just want to know, I mean, when we set the amount aside, we had to pick a number, but there's no wrong or right specific number. If at this point, sometime after the pandemic, 3.6 million remains available for allocation, do we feel completely obliged to allocate that for pandemic recovery, or can it come back into reserves?
Well, we repurposed it as the pandemic receded to address the cost of living pressures that we've seen emerge. I think those cost of living pressures still exist and are still a problem for a great many people. And so I think at this stage, we think it's useful that we have that lever available to help people. I wouldn't describe us as ever feeling obliged to spend that money, because clearly we need to spend it in a way that accords with the need that's out there and what we observe in the community and what we observe in terms of the lift dashboards and the data that we have available. But no, I think the pandemic need has receded. I think the cost of living is the major pressure that money now exists to solve. We are developing plans, which, as I say, I hope we can share with you sooner than we did last year, to address the cost of living pressure, and it probably will lean on that existing balance.
Well, in which case, I'll just make a quick comment, if I may, is that, I think broadly we're not here as a council to redistribute money from one resident to another. We're here to provide services. Now, I know it's a special situation with the cost of living crisis where specific grants and allowances were made. We are, and I'm not doubting that, some people still very much feel that, but we are now in a position where wages are rising above inflation, and so I think there's reasonable argument to be made of moving out of that. I mean, we should look more towards our bread and butter rather than what I see broadly as a redistributive scheme, though I fully understand why it was set up, but that's just sort of general.
I mean, you can tackle that either in its principle or in its substance. I mean, in principle, we do a lot of redistribution. We do the council tax reduction schemes, which I think we should actually celebrate more. I mean, it's a great shame that so many people need that help, but it's an example of where the council is intervening to help those most in need, and that's about £14 million a year. So we do a lot, and probably more than most other London boroughs, to address that kind of need, and that's redistributive. So I think what you're probably getting at is slightly the extent to which you are comfortable redistributing above and beyond that. And I think, clearly there can be a range of views about that. You're right that the inflation metrics have improved over the past 24 hours or so. I think it's still quite early to draw conclusions about what that means in terms of the cost of living pressure. And I'm keen to go the extra mile and make sure that those who need it most are being supported by this pot. It may be that in 12 months' time we come back and we say, well, yes, this was the start of the corner being turned. But I think in terms of budget planning for this cycle, we're still forecasting inflation for the next financial year at twice the level of the Bank of England's target rate. So that's still quite high inflation relative to what's being expected. And so I think it is a useful thing to consider how this pot can address the cost of living pressure.
Thanks, Johnny. And then I have a couple of specific ones. Well, actually, I'll just zoom in on this one. So perhaps we can go into more detail on this in ESC, but Chelsea Bridge, I've heard it said before that our deal with Wandsworth is we look after some bridges, they look after others, and we sort of time got the raw deal on the bridges that need more maintenance. But this is significant amounts of work needs to be spent on.
Which page?
Oh, sorry, apologies. It's in appendix. It's page 3 in appendix B.
I think I've got it, yeah.
Yeah, capital proposals. Yeah, I just wondered, given that, and I don't know what they're spending on their bridges over the next 4 years, but given the sort of extreme amounts of money that is required, is there any ability to revisit that agreement and ask for contribution from Wandsworth?
London-wide, the agreement on Kendrick, isn't it? I thought it was a whole.
Is it London-wide? I don't know, the agreement on.
I thought more likely on that, but it certainly is, yeah, I mean, each borough.
It's certainly long-standing
Yeah.
in terms of the arrangement that exists. I suppose whether it's London-wide or kind of done from the 2 boroughs, we could approach whomever has made that arrangement and seek to modify it to reflect the changed circumstances. But I suppose there's also a question of who we want running the bridge. And we've seen in Hammersmith and Fulham that it's been extremely challenging for a Labour administration to do that. I think it's a good thing that the Conservatives here in KNC are managing these bridges and making that proactive maintenance for here. It's a far deal less than is being spent, I think, on Hammersmith Bridge. And I think that's important to mention.
But I certainly agree. And the last thing we want is Chelsea Bridge going out of action. I just wonder, given the sums involved, whether it's possible to investigate.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we've seen Wandsworth Bridge, which is Labour managed, has been closed for a large part of the summer. Hammersmith Bridge, obviously, we're in the same position we've been for some years now. So that is just the caution I would throw out there.
I've got other questions on ESC, but I'll take them to ESC. Thank you.
Thank you. Just on, before I begin on the subject of redistribution, I'd just like to remind the committee that we are the most unequal borough in London. Wish to make that point. So whatever you make of that or how you think that reflects on the council, then that's for individuals. So in terms of the paper, I'm understanding that the medium-term financial strategy worst case scenario is a budget gap of 4.4 million. That's on page 85.
For 24-25, that
Yes.
one.
Yes, correct. So when I then look at page 92 and 3, I am seeing a budget gap, I think, of 9,741. And I'm seeing potential proposed savings as 12 million. And I'm just wondering, is that sort of like a contingency pending the results of consultation and the feasibility of the proposed reductions, or is that to generate some surplus? Should I say that?
I think it can be pretty straightforward. The intention isn't to put together surpluses. The intention is to deliver outstanding services. So I think there is some contingency at this stage in the cycle, but like you know, there is some certainty. And these are options we're consulting on. So it may be that we take forward all of them. It may be that we take forward fewer than that. And it may be that the budget position improves or it gets worse over that period of time.
So if we did take forward all of them, we would be inadvertently generating a surplus.
Yes.
Still on page 92, I would like to ask about the changes in funding of the council's rental recovery work. And I'm understanding from that table there's a saving of 2.5 million. And the question I'd like to ask is, how is that the case if that money was ring fenced? It's not then to balance the budget. This is money that was ring fenced for the recovery. If it hasn't been spent, it's an underspend and needs to be reallocated for the purpose for which it was ring fenced.
So if I can just draw your attention to the little star
Yes.
in the Grenfell, and you can see that it's being funded from the ring fence budget. The programme comes to an end in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
So for the year we're looking at for this programme 24-25, we've committed additional funding, and that's then detailed in paragraphs 14.21, 14.22 on page 110 and 111.
So that's the restorative justice programme, which is a separate matter. So as per that asterisk at the bottom of the table, there was a ring-fenced budget of 50 million committed in 2019.
Yes.
And I'm understanding that that 2.5 is from that ring fence. It's underspent from the ring fence.
Yeah, so the recovery, the 50 million, that was funded partly from reserves and partly from a contribution from the base permanent budget every year. As the recovery programme ends till 2024, effectively there's no more funding required from the base anymore because the programme's ending. So it's effectively no more council tax that's required to fund recovery.
Okay, so we can understand that thus far, the Grenfell recovery programme, such as it has been funded, including from council tax.
A mixture of that.
And I'm still not clear what is happening here with this 2.5 million. Is that from the 50 million? Is that part of the 50 million that was ring fenced?
So it's changing the funding a bit effectively.
No, I'm sorry. Funding is changing because of the restorative justice programme. That's a separate source of funding from the global settlement agreement. I'm wondering, this 2.5 million is not part of that. Where are we saving 2.5 million from?
From the council's budget.
It's from the 500 million? 50 million, sorry.
So the 50 million, when it was set up, was funded from a number of different sources.
Yes.
One source being the council.
So it remained 50 million?
Yes.
And it was ring fenced, 50 million?
Yes.
So is that 2.5 million part of that 50
The
million?
50 million is still there, but it was over a period of time. I think it was 5 years.
Yes, it was.
And part of it was 2.5 million coming from the council's base budget. So we would have put it from an accounting point of view into the base budget. And what we're saying is, because we don't need to continue that 2.5 million in the base budget, we're taking it out. The
So
base budget, but it's still there in the 50 million.
So it's an underspend of 50 million?
No,
No,
50 million is still there.
Yeah, because is it like in 2050, we're not still going to be spending that 2.5 million.
No.
So just we've got to the end of the year period, so we get that 2.5 million
Yeah,
back.
That's correct.
And then on your basis,
It's in the base of
we no longer have to
2019 to
contribute to every year.
2024. This financial year will begin in 2024, which is the end of that programme. There was money in the base each year, but we'll be funding the successor
But
programme.
that money was part of 50 million? I think I need to ask maybe more questions about this outside.
Maybe yes. I think a fundamental concern is there's been an impairment of the 50 million and it's being rechanneled to spend other things that it wasn't supposed to be. It was supposed to be funded as extras. But why don't you carry on that conversation outside, and then if you've got any further concerns, you can raise it at the next.
Absolutely.
Can I also thank Claire for talking about the inequality in the borough? I think that is important and actually part of why we are here. Although this budget and all the work that we do tries to address that, we should always remember that. And the council did, it had to change after the events at Grenfell. And tackling inequality and promoting social mobility should be part of that. I think some of the things we're already talking about tonight, whether the cost of living pressures or the voluntary sector money that we're spending, is part of that. So I just want to thank.
And Tom is also right to say that we should always keep an eye on the extent of that and whether that has buy-in from our residents as well. And it's also worth remembering that the council tax support is something that's been going on for 20 years at a maximum scale when many other councils never did it. So the council does have a long history of taking that view.
That's true.
I have just two more. One of them is an observation on page 100, looking at this pie chart here. This is the savings as a proportion of the net service budget, and I'm seeing the biggest slices of those pies are coming from things like children's services and social care. And I'm just I suppose I'd like to make a comment on how that looks. either perhaps there's a lot of surplus there to be economised on, or perhaps something else is going on. I'm not sure.
And the last.
So the pie chart
As a whole,
Yeah.
and those in savings.
Yeah.
That's because they're the biggest parts of the budget, not that they're the biggest savings.
Okay, thank you.
So the pie chart showing the net service spends. The little blue bit, the savings that's elevated out the pie chart is then broken down in favour of above.
Yeah.
So you can see how that 12.2 million breaks down in the pie chart that shows spend per service.
Okay.
So what the pie chart actually shows is that we spend more on adult and children's services than on anything else. Which again, I think is something that's a really good thing and something that we should welcome.
So it's good to highlight that then.
Absolutely.
Thanks. And the only other thing I wanted to talk about was the budget consultation. In terms of making sure that we get even more response and lessons on our proposals. So I can see on page 106 there's a lot of work being done to promote the consultation, but I'm just wondering if it's worth suggesting something about accessibility in that consultation, and whether it is worth perhaps summarising the key points in terms of growth rate and that's for want of a better word, so that people can understand actually what it's going to mean for them, and share their view that way. I think that might be helpful for people, especially people who are not financially experiencing reading budgets, including myself.
Or don't want to read long forward documents.
Well, exactly.
So on the website, when you go into the consultation, we work closely with the communities team on this, but we can always absolutely do more. And what you can do is you can search it by each of the different service areas. So if you're interested in just seeing something about adult social care, you can go in and look at that. If you're interested in seeing housing, you can look at that. But if you've got other ideas, we're all, welcome ideas that come back for how this might reach more people. We're going to the youth council in a week or so's time to talk to them, to try and engage the people in the borough as well. And we're happy to talk to any other groups, and we're reaching out. We're definitely using the communities team more this year to try and get further reach.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Mary. My first two questions is about, I'll go into more detail on this at the HCSC meeting. It's about temporary accommodation problems that we're having this year. And I wonder if it does come out in here, but I wonder if we can say a bit more about that orally. So what's the problem? What are we doing about it? Both in revenue and capital. I see tidy sums appeared on the next financial year in the capital pipeline on page 137. So what are the opportunities? How can we address this? And then, because I mentioned capital, it's therefore a linkage to my second question. So though it's welcome that inflation appears to be coming under control, it's going to be quite a while before the interest rates start to follow downwards, and the implications of continued high interest rates for our capital programme.
I'll start. So temporary accommodation, I think the biggest issue we're facing at the moment isn't rising numbers of people presenting or units of families presenting, it's actually rising cost of the accommodation. So particularly the hotels, the price per room per night is going up and up. So obviously two things: one, we want to move people out there because it's expensive, but two, we also want to move people out there because we want the best form of accommodation for those people. Our location doesn't help us because obviously it's expensive around here. So we are looking at other alternatives as to form hotel accommodation where we place those people. But obviously supply and demand aren't in line with each other at the moment. So that is a real issue. The capital programme has got spend in it for temporary accommodation units and housing. Again, we'll continue to have over a period of time to try and increase the number of the supply of units that we've got available.
I would just answer that. I think it's the biggest challenge in our revenue budget at the moment. I think we talked about this with the Q1 outturn. We've seen a pretty dramatic increase in those costs. Although we're probably faring a little bit better in terms of outturn overspends than a lot of other London boroughs. It is easily the biggest component of the overspend that we do have. It's something that, if it persists, is a big problem for our revenue budget and contributes to the uncertainty that we're facing, and is the reason for some of the decisions that we have to make here. I think Lisa's flagged well some of the things that we're doing. We also obviously do a lot of work on homelessness prevention, and I'm sure that's something that you scrutinise on a regular basis. My understanding is that our homelessness prevention work is some of the best in London in terms of the success that it has in that space. So I think that's something that we should welcome. But no, I think it's really something that you're right to highlight, that we hope starts to become a less acute pressure. If it becomes chronic, there will be difficult choices ahead, I think, on that.
To answer your second question, interest rates. So we are undertaking it, as it says in the paper as well, a review of the capital programme to make sure that schemes into the capital programme at the right time, and that we borrow monies at the right time, because obviously borrowing is costing money at the moment. We also are not holding that much at the moment, which has got the flip side, so therefore we don't earn the interest. And you'll see in the Q2 financial monitoring report, we now break down interest earned and interest payable. So we're looking at the two different sides of that, but we're just keeping a really close eye on that, working closely with our treasury team and also our treasury advisors as well.
Yeah, the basic answer is that it does make it harder to deliver big capital projects because the cost of borrowing has gone up. When we were in a low interest rate environment, it was much cheaper to borrow money. That made it easier to deliver big projects. And although we saw a good treasury management last year, so far this year it hasn't been as strong. So again, that's an uncertainty and something that we would like to try and manage, or to trend more quickly in the direction it's now going in.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. Page 94. No, sorry, 96, paragraph 7.21, just on council tax. We're collecting it sort of 97.5. So the two questions are, why aren't we at 100% if we want to be the best council, collect all our council tax? And if we do collect the other 2.5%, how much of that in pounds, shillings and pence, so that we know of the 12.2 million?
1% of our council
It's
tax.
990,000.
Yeah.
It's about 1 million, yeah.
So you're saying that if we got the 2.5, it's about 2.5 million. So is there a reason why we're not collecting the other 2.5?
Trying our hardest to, there are always people who pay.
Yeah, what are the obstacles? Bearing in mind we know where they live because they don't have a house.
They move, they run away.
We don't always know where everybody is all the time. You're right, we should know where they are when they live in that house, but as Chair pointed out, they do move away. And there is a process to go through as well to get money from people who don't pay, so you have to go through the court system and court orders and things. So
Just never going to go up above 97.5.
hopefully it will, but people are struggling at the moment, and that council tax isn't always the thing they want to pay first. So we're working, and we do try to work with people who don't pay as well and help them. So we talked already about the council tax support scheme, and working with them to obviously see if they are eligible for that as well. But I would say that is a good rate.
Yeah.
97.5, that's a good collection.
I was going to say that as well. In the past couple of years, it has gone up a bit actually. And that obviously means that we're realising more money in terms of the revenue budget that's available for council services. So it's been going in the right direction. I agree, I'd like it to be higher. I'd like it to be 100%. I think 100% is probably quite difficult, but hopefully we can get closer to that.
Thank you, Chair. I got two small questions. The first one is on page 105 about the school funding. It says here in second line, advised that they had uncovered an error made during the initial calculation of the school block. that error, you're still waiting, I understand, to hear further information. But what I'm trying to find out is, have we budgeted according to the error and now we have to budget down or no?
So the error was made by the Department for Education,
Yeah.
not the council, and it was a national error. They over calculated the amounts going out to local authorities. So it was for next year, 24-25. So we hadn't budgeted for it. Schools obviously will start to think about they might get more money than they thought they would, but they haven't got that money yet. So they've rewound that model and are working through that at the moment. But I must stress it was a Department for Education error.
Oh, no. I'm aware of that. But what my concern was, have we already, because when I'm promised some money, I always push around it. And if somebody comes and takes back parts of it, then my money is all over the place.
So I think because of the timing of it, we haven't done that much work. And so it comes in as one big lump. We then have to work out the model to schools. So we haven't done masses of work on that, working it through the model. So lots of the schools didn't know
No,
what
didn't
they
even
would get. They might have done in the head calculation and said, oh, I might get an extra percent or whatever, but not in their full costing at the moment.
Okay, and now here I'm going to veer into your territory. In page 109, 14.15, it's the initial, it's about carbon neutral. And my question is, are these figures, I've been seeing these figures, similar figures for a while. Has these figures changed by due to inflation? Yeah. Has anything? Are we where we're supposed to be? And what I'm thinking is the HS2 syndrome. You build, and then you have to.
These figures, I think, come from the ETHA report, which was developed the last time I did this portfolio. So it's been in the ether for some time now. Clearly, construction costs, inflation, etc., have gone up. So I anticipate it would go up. I don't think we have a new figure, but obviously it's a fast-changing picture, so it'd be quite difficult to have a figure that's up to date at any of these meetings in that sense.
Okay.
But where you're right to flag something is that this has made it materially harder to deliver net zero.
Yeah.
Of course, it's something we want to deliver. Greener is the first thing in our council plan, likewise in the manifesto on which we were elected. I think there's a lot of really good work that can happen on that journey. So, for example, we're already underway on some of the phase 1 schools and operational buildings where we're trying to retrofit. But no, it is a challenge. It does make it harder. We still want to be net zero, but we need to be straight with people. And whilst, there's probably some commentary around the tone of some of the debates around net zero. And I think there are probably valid positions on either side of that debate around tone. The substance is absolutely right. I mean, it has become harder for the state to deliver this aspiration, and having a frank conversation about that is only a good thing.
So what's the pragmatic thing to do? Just have a conversation and have people, or is there any way of looking at the things that you can do and do it within the budgets or within the amount of money you have and available for you, and maybe not have the ambition, the same thing as they did with cars, they pushed it a few years. Is there a scope of maybe pushing it a few years so that you can achieve it comfortably without actually destroying the rest of your
well, part of the question is, around the money. Clearly, we're not going to spend money we don't have. So to the extent that you're describing, should you just spend the money you have and do as much as you can? That's always the approach. We're not going to put ourselves in the position of a Section 114 notice to deliver a single aspiration.
Okay.
So that's the constraint. I think the aspiration, which is net zero, is a good one. I'm strongly supportive of net zero as an aspiration. I think in terms of timings, I think we can get. I don't want to open that question.
Yeah.
What I can say is that us setting a net zero declaration when we did has driven faster progress on greening and on the environment than I think we otherwise would have had. So it has, irrespective of kind of the change picture we're now in, been a positive lever in helping us to realise some of our climate goals. Over the past 5-6 years, we've cut carbon emissions the fastest in London. We should be proud of that. You know, this is one of the greenest boroughs in London in that sense. We are delivering new parks. There's a new park coming in Locks Road. There's a new park coming in the Oscott Master Plan. We have the aspiration of retrofitting every hall in the borough. A lot of that stuff hadn't been committed at the time before the net zero declaration. We've got a program to deliver 400 new trees. It's a really ambitious program, and it's one that I'm really happy that we're all here to support. But yes, I mean, where you have described a challenge around funding, yeah, that's absolutely there. It's something we need to be mindful of.
So shall we consider changing the language instead of, because sometimes with people, when you have targets, it's very rigid and it's very, one end to another. Can we say aspirations, for instance, as opposed to targets?
Look, I think ultimately we can play semantic games about this.
Yeah.
But in the end, what we want to do is spend as much money as we can within the available envelope to drive forward our aspirations to get to net zero. And I think that's something we would all subscribe to around this room, probably irrespective of party too. So no, I'm strongly supportive of the work. I want us to do as much of it as we can, as fast as we can. Of course, it needs to be balanced against our other considerations. We talked about the cost of living, ongoing Grenfell funding, which is totally vital, adult social care pressures, temporary accommodation. So it's one of a number of things that is a council priority, but it's absolutely there as a priority.
Thank you. Well,
If I just make a comment on that last interaction, one of the characteristics of our carbon zero ambitions is that 60-something% of that ambition is in social housing.
Yes.
And 90% is in our buildings. Now, the characteristic of buildings in social housing or otherwise is the refurbishment opportunity only happens about one time in between 10 and 20 years. And therefore, it isn't so easy to change the timescale unless you slide the program of your refurbishments. That has other implications. Yeah. However, what has already happened is that the ambition originally to go to, after ether has to go to EPC-B as a target, which is what the ether assumed in the modeling, has been changed to go to EPC-C. And that is the ideal target in most of the refurbishments, although some street projects, it's not possible even to do that. But there are practical mitigation measures. The added cost of doing the carbon zero work, do the other work that's done, considering all the setup costs, contingencies, etc. With sort of setting up projects, is the same what you do. If you cut out the carbon zero work, you can't go back to it, and when you do it, as I said, an exercise only, it costs you a lot more to do. I think Doug Goldring and other these officers are making a fantastic effort, and we should recognise that there is even this week, there's a big decarbonisation grant come in. That's for a shady. And so I think that we should not be too concerned. I think we can go into this a lot more in the Tom Bennett's environmental committee. The question and point I wanted to make, suggestion I wanted to make, however, my part was that under 2.1, the recommendation, if we refer the attached report in particular proposals contained to the select committees, I would definitely support that. In reflection of the work that's been going on, particularly by Jackie, in putting together the work for the select committees. I suggest that we change the wording to saying that this paper A6, together with paper A8, are referred to the select committees, and then going on into the appendices in this report A6. My question was why the A and B were referred to, not A to D appendices that are going to be referred to. sort the whole report with so my suggestion is that in particular we refer A6 together with A8 because a lot of the sort of question that Lucy was raising with regard to the uncertainty around the UCB, not only a reflection on adult social care but also on children's services. Those are particularly illustrated and enumerated, in particular in family children's services. There's a number that's been put in there by Lisa in her report. So that uncertainty needs to be seen alongside what is in A6 when we talk about. So purely just to change the wording of that recommendation.
So this whole report is going to each of the selects.
So it's the whole report.
Whole report.
Plus A8.
Yes, this.
Recommendation.
Right, okay. So that is the revised recommendation, which we then need to accept or not. I mean, maybe is it worth taking the recommendation at that point?
Sorry?
Is it worth taking the decision?
What? Sorry.
To go with the recommendation as I've suggested amending.
I'm pleased with it.
Right, so fine.
But I'm just, I'd like to make some.
Okay.
I can go mention.
No, nobody wants to do it then.
So I to point out that a couple of observations I wanted to make. And one is the importance of paragraph 10 and the strategic change, looking further ahead. And we talk every year about not salami charge pricing next year, but we never seem to quite get to the more strategic approach. So I think it'd be really useful for us in the course of next year to have a paper to the scrutiny committee about our approach, sooner rather than later, really, once we sort of put most of this to bed, about what our approach is going to be, and looking at things like property and all the rest of it, all our assets. It just reminded me when we were reading the paper. And we've talked before about how much improved this document is, and I really think it is improved over the previous years. But I think there are a couple of places in which it might be a good idea to have a little bit. We've talked about perhaps having a report on spend to save projects in future, which might usefully form part of budget documents. I also thought, we're constantly struggling to get on top of the capital budget or stop the slippage. Might be quite useful to report on what the cost of that slippage is to us every time, if there is a cost or an opportunity cost of slippage. I think it might be worth highlighting that in the future to sort of concentrate our minds. Donny, you're looking a bit.
No, I'm agreeing. I'm agreeing. These are things that we're thinking about, and I think they're well made comments. So with the capital program, we're going through the capital program at the moment, trying to identify, and in the context of that higher borrowing climate that you talked about, is everything on the capital program still a need, and is it still a priority? Are there things for which that we're borrowing against, whether that's in the program or in the pipeline, that actually we probably aren't quite ready to start work on, and therefore maybe we shouldn't borrow quite as quickly or at all? Can we exhaust other funding opportunities? So I know with sadness that there's still a lot of unspent still in 106 monies. I would like us to be using them like that before we turn to things like borrowing. So that has an impact. In terms of transformation, I couldn't agree more. We had a meeting on that today, talking about transformation for the next year. Lisa was there, so you can vouch for me. And I think we've been very clear as a leadership team, certainly to officers, and I think officers have grasped that challenge, that we do want transformation next year. I don't think salami slicing would work for a budget cap of £23 million next year. There's only so much salami that can be sliced. I think we're now in an environment where we do need to think more radically. It's why I highlighted some of the transformational work in a service like parking, because it's illustrative of the kind of change and approach we'll need in a whole variety of services in order to meet that challenge.
Brilliant, thank you. So I hope we can recommend that we have a paper on that next year, and that we think about doing those couple of tweets to reporting. And I think the other point I'd make is when I look at Appendix A, it's pretty vague, some of this stuff. So the 2 million, I'm just take the first one, adult social care, £2 million spending pleasure. Not really clear you know, what proportion of that is complexity, what proportion of that is increase in numbers. There's no real detail there. Now, I know that the select committees, or at least I hope they are going to go in and ask you those questions. And I know I've got lots on OSC, you know, including, you know, a £270,000 increase in the chief executive's office. And I know that we will be wanting to really interrogate that and understand it. But there is a point at which, you know, a member of the public looking at this is basically being fobbed off with some quite, not fobbed off, but there are some quite big numbers here that have some quite brief descriptions. And is there a question? I mean, obviously, I'm not expecting you to write, you know, War and Peace on all of this, but is there a sense in which you haven't really got down to the nuts and bolts about what is driving these pressures in the description? And you know, I'm not suggesting you change this now, but maybe that's something that the select committees can tease out as well when we're talking about it. And perhaps we'll come back with some recommendations about how we could make it clearer. Just coming back to the point, you know, if we're going to consult with people, is that a meaningful paragraph about increased budget pressures for adult social care? You know, arguably it's not. So thank you very much for that. And I will carry on with the amended recommendation here.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's fine. You don't succeed. We're not trying, but no. So if we can agree that recommendation and the additional comments.
So we got two recommendations, and we got the amended 2.1. And
Yes.
we've also got the recommendation on the transformations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. So let's move on to the monitoring report. And I haven't invited anybody else to comment because I don't think we've got any members of the public or any other council. I've consistently failed to do that, but for a good reason. I like to maintain. So the monitoring report obviously is very important, keeping track of where the council is going financially this year rather than looking forward to next year. Johnny, do you or Lisa? Liam?
Yeah, we can cover this. This is obviously out two. I think it's an improved position relative to INSA 1, but still a position that should be a concern to members. Over the past few years, we've tended to show underspends. Obviously, we don't want large underspends because that suggests that we haven't spent all of the money available on service delivery, which is what we're here for. But equally, an overspend is a real worry because that reflects a budget that effectively didn't properly balance. I think generally the picture has improved since the first quarter in terms of temporary accommodation, in terms of treasury management, and in terms of recovery from the industrial action that affected us in part. So each of those factors has got better over the past quarter. And when I brought the previous paper, I did say that, you know, it does fluctuate during the year. Last year we had an overspend at Q1 and we emerged with an underspend. So I think what we're seeing is that kind of fluctuation in year. I would hope it continues to trend in the right direction. I think, you know, we can. It's certainly reasonable to hope that it would. I think temporary accommodation, which I flagged as a major pressure. I think social care and demand in the winter tends to be harder to manage, but that's something that does happen year on year. So I suppose other than the demographic pressure making that more acute this time, it's kind of a known pressure, at least conceptually. And when it comes to things like inflation and interest rates, it seems as though, and we need to be cautious about this, that we may have reached the top in terms of those costs. Let's see, and I don't want to tempt fate, but the figures today are better and they've been trending in a better direction over the past 3-4 months now, probably. So fingers crossed on that front. But yes, we obviously want to see this figure come down, and it reflects, as I described earlier today, the challenging climate that we're in.
Thank you. Open to committee questions. Well, we'll start with you.
I was going to wonder whether there's a slightly different interpretation of this, because it strikes me that going through the pattern of the red, I mean, I have analysed the ambers in detail, and all of the greens. The ambers, sorry, the reds, many of the underspends here to assist either of our to a large extent, there's slippage, and that assists in the ability to manage the budget within the capacity we have this year. So which it's a sort of chicken and egg situation, which? Is it the slippage that's creating the underspend, or the need to have an underspend that creates the slippage?
The underspend that Johnny's talking about is the revenue budget, so you don't slip revenue budget. I think the underspend you're talking about is the capital budget, is that correct?
No, not entirely, no.
So if you,
Things like the travel cards and such like, I mean, I don't, yes, some of them are capital, HRA, the HRA capital account. This, and you know, it puts, the question I'm putting it is, that if we didn't have those slippages, it'd be much harder to manage the budget. Therefore, the question mark is one of the ways of managing the budget by using the slippages to do that. Program delays and salami slicing and generally not doing stuff helps you not spend money in a year.
so I think
So
in the
there's a
revenue
pressure to
budget,
do that.
sorry, I think in the revenue budget, there is not masses of that. There is some things where we thought the costs would be greater and now they're not. But that might be because we've become more efficient rather than slippage. But in the capital programs, definitely there is still slippage.
But maybe in the maybe in the revenue account, we actually have built in more contingencies than we need.
Yeah, that's possible. I think
And as the budget tightens up, obviously those areas no longer become available, and therefore I would agree with what your predecessor said and you said, is that 25/6 is probably where the crunch comes.
yeah, and we're
So we
seeing
need
that in these
transformation
numbers now.
change. So I'm not disagreeing with your advice strategically. The characteristic of this long list of items is that it has proved possible to salami slice and to shift program items to manage the budget. I'm being a bit cynical, but I think that it's really a question of chicken and egg, which you believe.
Okay, well, yeah, I see here in children services, you have an overspend in the revenue, but an underspend in the capital. And is the underspend in the capital predominantly because of the Aldrich Academy phase 2 hasn't been completed? And it says also here somewhere, I think you're using, needing to use, spend more money in getting the work done. Is that predominantly it, or is there something else?
Yes, so on page 165, section 2.7, we only spent about £1.5 million in the capital programme against a budget of 17 million. And there's three key things driving that. £500,000 is around the Kensington Aldrich Academy phase 1. It's now complete, but phase 2 has moved slightly. So that's reprofiled into a future year. And then strategic plans and reactive maintenance, another 700,000. And then the third item is around conditions studies. And again, both of those last two have just been slipped into future years.
So how much of the phase 2 is part of the underspend? Is there because with building materials and inflation, it changes. So how much? I'm just curious how much of that is
£535,000 has been
That's
moved
it,
from phase 2.
okay. And in the revenue side of things, we've changed the way we used to send our SEN children. We use transport to do that, to take them outside the borough. Are we 100% now doing it internally, or are there still some that have to go somewhere else?
I believe there's still a mix of in borough and out borough SEN placements, but we have with the Kensington Queensmill School coming on board, that has reduced SEN transport, and there's currently by about 80,000. So, but there are still children who are out borough.
So you still have some.
And it's a really successful spend to say that. And I think the example of a capital project that appears to have been a success.
Yes, exactly.
We've got a really good school there, which was a public good in terms of the education and facilities that are provided to young kids in the borough. We're reducing costs, but also the inconvenience and the time spent of transporting people with complex needs out of borough. And we're realising a budgetary saving. So this is something that I think, we should feel confident about saying has been a really good thing that the council has done.
I think it even goes even further than that, because I think this borough is now being a centre of excellence with regards to providing services for not only for children who had special provision, but for children like in SEN supported in general provision.
Yeah, I mean, this is an example of a facility in North Kensington where the council has invested in this now and is now realising results from it.
All right, good, thank you. Sydney.
Thank you, Chair. Just had a quick question on the performance indicators, page 194, paragraph 87. This is the Office for Local Government making sure that councils are more transparent so they can get into financial difficulties. I just asked a quick question on whether we publish the figures or whether they're on a separate government website, whether they're on our website, so the member of the public can see how we're doing, or whether the data from the off-log can be put on our own website so that people get the reassurance that we are actually improved. And the two additional indicators that you indicated in table 27 and 28, there isn't any data on table 26 that you've included. So I just want to ask a question on.
So thank you. So off-log only came into being in July 2023. So we haven't published anything yet because obviously it's too new. I would need to check whether we are expected to publish. Obviously we're publishing in this report because we want to be transparent, and they will also publish on their website in the future as well. The performance indicators at 26 are the off-log ones. We haven't put any numbers against them yet because it's too early for us to work those through, and we will be doing that as part of introducing these arrangements with off-log.
And so just so I'm clear, clearly we've got accounts going back many years, so we could provide 21, 22, 22, 23 for these figures.
We can.
So we can do that.
Yes.
That can be a historical figure, which is obviously there in the public domain. We don't necessarily have to produce, details on the 15th of November 2023. Is there a reason they can't be filled in based on last year's figure?
No reason, just capacity and time than anything else.
And given that you are going to be looking to put these figures in, can you give us a definitive time so we can come back and double check that they've been done by that date? When do you expect that to be done?
I think we'd let's put them in a quarter three.
Quarter three.
Thank you. Greg?
Yeah. Question I asked for quarter one report, and the lead member's already expressed his sadness at the answer, and that's the section 106 cell, so page 187 and 188. Actually, I mean, section 106 from memory, it looks like it's been populated with quite a bit more allocated since the last time we were here, and I see that in the proposal. But there appears to be no attempt to spend the borough cell. So what can we do about that to spend it? Is it so restricted that we can't spend it on anything?
No, it's not so restricted that we can't spend it on anything. But as I say, I would like us to spend more of it faster. I suppose the only mitigation I would say is that it is a good thing that we have this available to respond to emerging priorities. So there are several financial commitments that potentially we might have to make over the coming years, whether that's step-free access to the tube station. I know that you're campaigning passionately for South Kent Station. We're all here to fight for Notting Hill Police Station. We're trying to develop a park in Loss Road. There are projects to which we're politically committed that will need a budget against them. SIL is one route towards funding them. It's not the only one, and it's not necessarily the one we would use, but it does give us a degree of flexibility around the commitments we can make to respond to emerging priorities. So that's a mitigation. But having said that, I completely agree with the thrust of what you're saying, which is that we should be spending more of it. I certainly think we should spend it before we go to borrowing, particularly during this period in interest rates. It is something that I and the leadership team have made, I think, plain, and if I haven't made it plain enough, then I'm happy to do so tonight, that we should be doing. And there are, although I've noticed a few projects that maybe don't have a budget against them right now, there are plenty of things that do, and that still could be applied to. Actually, for the purposes of kind of capital and infrastructure, it's pretty broad. Now, that's not a total carte blanche, but it does mean that we can think flexibly and creatively and determinedly about how we can use it to deliver the council plan commitments we've made.
So are we going to see some progress on the sales specifically, because there's nothing allocated to it with it before the end of the financial year, do you think?
I'd like us to.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
I think I don't have any specific questions. I think the aspects of housing will come to my committee again.
Lovely.
But I did want to comment on the communities, which seems to be on page 166. You've got a lot of different areas of underspend, which seems to be due to increased performance in income. So I just wanted to make sure that was noted as positive. And in terms of the housing, what I'm seeing is that we've got a lot of slippage on the capital.
Yeah, we do. It's a really important and also ambitious programme. But obviously, there are constraints in terms of capacity and financing, which you'll be familiar with. And so I think our commitment towards those goals is pretty clear. But yeah, there's a challenge in terms of delivery.
And then just quickly, in terms of again housing revenue, there are some there's an under, and I think about the pension, but also some slippage. And I suppose what I just want to ask is what would be the impact of that overall on the year, because elsewhere we're seeing, of course, that housing revenue account has a lot of pressure on it.
So the
You mean
pension,
HRA?
housing revenue and the HRA, the pension, so because the council pension fund is overfunded, which is a really good position to be in, the contribution we're making to the pension fund is less. When the budget was set for the HRA, it was set at a higher rate, so there is an underspend against that double line, which obviously enables the HRA to spend that money on something else.
I suppose what I'm asking is to what extent is that in short-term fluctuation? Will it have an impact on the overall year?
So it will be a short term, it's a 2-year impact, and the valuation of the council pension fund is every 3 years. We've taken that saving for 2 out of the 3 years. We'll then have the new actuarial valuation, and we'll be given a different figure again as to what contribution we need to make. So it needs to be kept a really close watch on it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. One question, sort of purely financial question, and one about an ESC item. Financial question. So I noticed there's quite big variations. The movement of interest rates makes quite a big difference to our projections as we go quarter to quarter. And I just wonder what's being done to maximise return on our reserves, because we know banks are always quick to pass on higher interest rates to lenders but not to savers. So what's been done to maximise return on our reserves? Have we even looked at things like we were just talking about SIL and section 106? Could we, even if it's sort of fairly restricted, could we lend ourselves money, borrow money out of that pot to fund to reduce our borrowing costs, and then when we want to pull down on SIL or 106, to pay that money back and you borrow that money later, so you at least reduce the borrowing costs? If we looked at anything like that, and also, maximising returns. I'll let you answer that one first, and then I'll come
So we do that already. So although we're talking about it here as separate pots of money, actually it's seen as one big pot of money. We can't do it differently. So we do that.
And then in terms of money that we do have sitting in the account, fairly large organisations, do we maximise our interest returns on that.
Treasury management.
So we
Yeah.
work with our treasury advisors and our treasury team, and they advise where's the best place to put that, both short term and long term, depending on what our cash flow demands are as an authority. There's a lot of work goes on behind the scenes as to where's the best place to place money at the time and for how long.
Yeah.
And we see our treasury management strategy once a year, actually at full council, don't we? So we know how adventurous the council works. We let ourselves be with our thinking for it.
Well, thank you for that. And then the other one about the specific ECS item, it's just an amber item on page 202, which is the biggest saving identified in ECS, third item down. So we think that we're not going to make all the significant savings we'd hoped for on that item, which is additional revenue to be generated from rebasing the tariffs for resident and visitor parking and the introduction of express parking suspensions charges. Could you give me a bit more information on why we won't get all of that?
So we made an estimate, we set the budget of a further 1.8 million. We now say we'll probably achieve just over 1 million, so therefore a shortfall of 757,000, and that's around demand. We're just not getting the demand that we thought when we set the budget. You'll probably see that number change again, because obviously we keep an eye on it every quarter. But at this point in time, having looked at what's already happened for the year and projected that forward, we think that will be the shortfall. And we do need to be careful, and I say this to Johnny regularly about setting things and charges. Is, you can reach a ceiling. So if you go too high, then people stop using your services. So it's really important that we are mindful of that. And probably in this instance, we were probably a bit over generous in how much income we thought we might achieve, and we're just not seeing that at this point in time. But it may peak later on in the year. I think we need to
is that more the express parking suspensions, or is it more the resident? Because my understanding is that resident parking is actually slightly on the increase now for the first year in many years.
I don't know specifically.
Okay. Maybe I'll bring that to
I'm going to warm the people coming to the select committee up so they come in the answer.
Thank you. That would be great.
Alert them. Lucy, sorry, you finished on.
Mine is just on one of the ASC items on page 199. We've got a few amber and reds. On specifically, just want some more information on more efficient procurement of mental health and some chance integration with housing to make housing available at the point of discharge in the community. Is that due to the fact that there is a lack of housing? Is the sort of red one, which says 150 next to it? Or just more of an explanation?
It's probably best we take that away and come back to you on that. That's okay, because I think it's probably a mixture of things.
Yeah. And is that, I don't know if I'm being silly about this, but that's the aim of that would be 150 saving facts. It seems to have given a lot of what's going on at the moment, a strange place to be saving on when it's quite a desperate issue.
So when the budget was set this time last year, I think the adult services thought they would be able to procure more efficiently, and obviously that's not happening now. But I don't know why that's not happening. I.e., it could be that the placements aren't more efficient, or it could be there are more people coming through the system, and that's the bit I need to take away.
Okay. No, I feel to say down that. Yeah.
I think I have nothing to add to that question. So thank you very much. And recommendation was simply that we were going to move this paper, but thank you for giving us such clear explanation. I think I'm going to agree with you. So thank you very much for answering a lot of questions so clearly. So we're now going to move on to item A9, which was the forward plan completed. Sorry, I'm looking ahead to the please. It's Scrutiny work group, so I'll go for it. Lisa, we're going to introduce this one.
Yes, happy to, Chair. So this is the update for the committee. So the work of the budget scrutiny working group looking at the budget for the year we're currently in, 23-24, as part of the work they made 13 recommendations to the leadership team as part of the budget process last year. And this is an update for you on those 13 recommendations. So in Appendix 1 on the first page, page 21, we've got the recommendations that we made as part of that working group, so you can part of that. And then on pages 22, 22, 23, and the rest of the report, we've got updates from the relevant executive directors or directors responsible for each of those 13 recommendations. Of course, happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Well, your turn.
Could I pick up? As I said, I think before, I very much welcome this report. Obviously, as I chaired the committee, I have vested interest in it. But the thing that's really surprised me pleasantly was that it was accepted in total by the lead member and the leadership team and by the council. And further than that, the report back, if you read through, whilst items 1 to 6, for instance, there's been positive progress on all fronts. And on item 7, there's a question mark on the pace of work, as Johnny's referred to, in terms of the HRA's capital. But the real shocker in here is the illustration under 9, the pressure, or really it's not even the pressure, it's the indecisiveness by the ICB. I have to declare, I mean, we're talking about declarations of interest earlier on. I'm a governor of a hospital, so in a very minor way, right at the bottom of the pyramid, I'm involved in the ICB's process. And there are practitioners within the ICB who realise what we do as a local authority, and they realise that if the NHS stopped funding moderate need, which is the real threat, so under the paragraph 9, they've stopped funding moderate need. Moderate need will grow towards being more acute need, and it will create exactly what the ICB is trying to reduce, which is the pressure of acute need on their services. So whilst there are some practitioners in the NHS who realise how this interaction works, I think there are other ones who are fairly senior, some of them, who don't understand how it works. And I think the sort of work that Elizabeth Campbell as leader and Maxine as the leader of our officer corps do in talking to those people in the ICB who do understand these interactions, hospital discharge and such, is absolutely vital, because we've got structural change in funding that could take place. As Lisa's pointed out, to make a 50% reduction in some aspects of children's services. Now that's dramatic. It would take away all sorts of policy decisions that we've made in terms of guarantees to people, the most vulnerable people in our community. I think this is a very strong report. It'll have to be built on in future, but it also provides, that's why I was being so insistent earlier on changing the recommendation under A6. The stuff here for the select committee to really think through, and it's coming through as a positive response from the leadership team on each of the headings. So thank you to Johnny and the leadership team, and thank you to Lisa Taylor particularly for her report here. I think it's an excellent report.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And can I pay tribute to Will and his team on the working group for all of the work that they did on it too, because I think it's an important contribution to the budget cycle.
Thank you. Well,
yeah, thank you. I'm actually, I welcome the number 11, the simplification of the city living worker life, because it was a nightmare filling those forms and coming back and forth and back. So are the new forms ready now? Is it the new system? Is it up and going? Because we are in November, supposed to start from the end of November. Do you know if it's if they're ready? Not yet.
I don't know. I haven't seen a draft of
We can check.
Okay, thank you. And my second second question is number 12, which is the implementation. I am actually one of those very excited about trust. I think we all are. I was wondering, they're supposed to be coming, are they ready to be unveiled in for Christmas?
I
Or
very much hope so.
okay,
I feel so.
because it's an exciting prospect, just having one person deal with everything. That is just fantastic.
I think they've been soft launched already.
Yeah. Okay, well, I haven't seen any. Where's
It's a soft launch.
Once Jim's going to blow his trumpet, I think it's.
Yeah, I know.
Flag.
I can say that, sorry, Councillor Idris, my name's Nadia Hewitt and I have been working with the team and I can say they are gelling well together and hopefully we'll have something for you.
Oh, can we launch them in Brompton and Alstown, please?
I'll let them know.
We've got to alphabetically be.
It's Abingdon.
Well, nobody's in that place.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you for this report. On page 225, I commend the gross expenditure on long-term care being higher than the London average, with the borough, which is fantastic. But I just ask a quick question on the short-term care expenditure in the row below. See that it's £149 compared to the London average, and just ask if there's a reason for it being so low short-term.
Was that something Lucy can take up then?
Maybe you're committed to it.
I don't know. I would be guessing that you probably have to do less. I think, it's more longer term, but I think it's probably one for the, the state.
Maybe there are socioeconomic factors.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
Awesome, house.
Yeah, I had, sorry, one question, point 6, just reviewing ways of working and building use. So it's good to see that some space has been identified but can be let commercially. I was just wondering if you had any more detail on that, so how much space, and are we still reviewing other properties?
Yes, I think we are still reviewing and we are reviewing with alacrity use of corporate buildings. Occupancy isn't as high as it was before the pandemic, although it probably has recovered a bit. It's still at a level at which there should be scope to generate more revenue from our corporate buildings, and also probably think about ways of working when we talk about transformation. So I think the short answer is kind of yes to that. And I think there probably will be additional space that we can let. Thank you.
Maybe they'll come back to us as part of the sort of strategic look at.
I know that the new lead member is looking at this pretty closely, and she is enthusiastic about the opportunities here.
We'll hear more about it, but I agree it's important. Lucy?
I think Cindy took up my question, so.
Good, well, thank you very much for your response on that one.
Okay, cool.
So we everyone found interested in it. Now, we are to finally I can get to afternoon now, which is the report of the scrutiny manager. Serious on anything here?
No, if you just want to go through and identify any claims and these key decisions that might need more scrutiny, but I will say that I have been having conversations with colleagues since your last meeting, which they reported back to Mary, about the quality of some of the information, the descriptions, and there's going to be some work around that. And I've also had a meeting with colleagues in governance today about the format of the report, to get a better format. I've told them what we want. They're working on it, and they're going to give me something that I can send around for you to have a look at. I think that will include dates for when they think things are going to happen.
Good question. Mary, sorry?
Thank you, Chair. So I only had one observation on page 245. The second bullet down, the reference.
We were going to call through the whole paper and
yes.
see and spot if anybody thought there was anything, and then if you could pick it up then. So we're going to start. I'm using the numbering on the report. Page 1. Page 2. 3.
RBKC housing strategy. I think we need to see some more detail on that.
Yeah, I've asked for that. Some of these have no description in advance of the meeting. We could get some more information.
And it sounds like one that you will want to scrutinise,
Yeah.
if it's anything like what it sounds like.
Or is it one we've already done? Because
Yeah.
there's, it looks very familiar, but on the other hand,
And it is 23 to 27.
it is. So I'm wondering if it's one we did last year, but I don't know because it doesn't say. So I think we do need to investigate that. Assess.
Okay, page 4.
Can I raise one here? Voluntary sector support fund award of grants. A concern arisen is that if some of the voluntary sector organisations ask, make applications for funds from more than one source, before we grant or through our arrangement with the Kensington Chelsea Foundation, do we make sure those requests are coordinated so that we close the door to multi-funding?
Well, housing committees scrutinise this.
Yeah.
So what is this something that was raised or?
I don't think it was.
No,
Well, actually, I think what we said is more than that, it's actually to make sure that they're not getting money from two different bodies at the same more
So this is a question for this, because we're not going to want to look at this paper now.
No, we'll take it off. Helen makes a note for us, and I will ask officers if they can confirm it.
But we've already
the second part of that is having coordinated and make sure that numbers get governance around KPIs, etc. on delivery.
Yeah, so page 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. School nursing service, is that something that we ought to look at the time? Sorry.
No, I just had one on 5.
Yeah, fine.
Sorry, digital, RBKC digital strategy. Without diving into that, I don't know, but sounds like it could be important.
I'll just say that one of the issues I've raised with that is it's for 2022 to 24.
Yeah.
I've already scrutinised.
So unfortunately, the lead number has left, so I have got a query about what's happening with that. But you did have an early version of it, as it says in November 22.
Yeah.
So it may well have changed so much that we need to scrutinise it again, so that's a good one. Well done. So school nursing. Is that one we've got 10?
Page 8, no, it's on page 8.
Page 8. Sorry, I'm sure you've picked these up before. I'm not. Okay. Is this something you would want to scrutinise? Because it's.
Yeah, we can, yeah.
I'll have a look at
That
that.
looks interesting. It could fall under.
And we've covered you. Home care's already been looked at. Page 9. That's 10.
Yeah.
These are your ones.
Yeah. Well, sorry?
Page 10, we're on to your stuff.
Yeah. We're still
Which
on.
ones do you think you ought to pick up on? Anything you think you ought to pick up on here?
I was supposed to open up on the page 8 thing about school nursing. Is that?
Yeah.
Is that that's not under,
Family.
it's not under family.
Yes, it is.
No, it's actually written down as adults.
Yeah, so that's the other section.
I would actually say, well, I guess
Together.
It's public health, that's why.
Yeah.
But it could, if it's health.
But the age group of
If it's health, it's probably under adult. But if it's
Well, you and Lucy could have a discussion,
Yeah.
but for public health comes under adults,
Yeah.
but because there's a children's specialism.
Provision.
Yeah,
Yeah.
agree that,
Yeah.
for school nursing.
We could look
come
at
under-
Understand.
come under- Yes.
Sorry, yes, page 10. Yeah, there was any of those, there's some quite major things there.
I'm going to stick out though.
I was thinking of speech language.
Yeah.
Because I suppose
There's
it's,
one at the bottom.
yeah, the one at the bottom of page 10
Yeah.
is that supplementary intervention
Yeah.
for people who are below the titration for the HCP plan.
Yeah.
So moderate needs SEN support is absolutely crucial.
And what about the family and parenting support program?
So was
Because
that,
there's
so you want to look at the targeted support for speech and language?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the direct report for Commissioned Youth Services is basically an extension while they think about it, and you'll probably want to scrutinise the thinking about it paper rather than this one, but good, okay,
Okay.
page 11. 12.
I'm sorry, that we got to same page.
No, it's,
12,
It's for fundamental.
sorry, Will, which one was?
It's the one at the bottom of page 11, how it interacts with community nursery tradition funding.
So is that what you want to look at, or what I want to look at?
he wants to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit of a grey area because
It is.
the mayor of London has given this.
Exactly, and I don't want to,
Question
yeah.
of how much interaction there is between the two, whether it's clarity.
So should we put that one on the list of potential reviews?
Possibly, but it does say that it's a decision to award a grant, so presumably that's been done with a specification. So I'm
Let
not
me
sure.
just check that that's all there is to it.
Yeah.
And if that is all there is to it, it's probably not so much fun, but
Yeah.
there is more of them. So we're on page 12, okay, and then 13 is.
Yeah, I have one just request on page 13 under the fire door. I know it's going to be dealt with under the housing scrutiny committee, but if for this committee, we were told how many total doors there were within the borough, because obviously we want to be very professional on fire and fire safety, and how many have been checked. Just the total figure.
You could attend the next housing crisis committee, and there's a paper on it there.
Fantastic.
But this particular one is quite a low level one. It is here, but there's another.
Yeah.
Not, you would know that from the description. I have asked for it. I have asked for one, to be fair.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
14.
Presumably the non-board police station will be taken elsewhere.
It's down to the lead member, but they could put it to this committee because it's property, but we'll just wait to hear what happens.
So, yeah. 14, 15. 16.
The decarbonisation is quite interesting. I think these decisions, there's two of them, are quite low level ones. But on the other hand, it's what could be called a novel
Sorry.
It's 16. It is in part those decarbonisation funds is they're important to our ability to reach net zero. They're going to be part of the paper that's coming to ESC at next committee.
I think to notice that the problem on capital funding for HRA is £100 million overall. And on these two KDs here, there's 22 million already in there. So it isn't as hopeless as Johnny was making out. If that funding still keeps flowing through, as long as it's not match funding. And then the issues of whether we can afford the matching.
I think it does need to be scrutinised though, because in terms of retrofitting and bringing homes up to the standard thank you. My understanding is that it's not actual data that's being used to decide which homes get that, because it doesn't exist unless you've had an upgrade. There's no grading on a lot of homes, so it's estimated.
We captured
quite
that
a lot,
one.
in fact. So I think it's really important that that does get scrutinised. And also, if I can add, no, that's it.
Good.
Yeah, that's it.
17. 18. 19.
I have one on 19, which is the distribution of the council tax energy bill rebate. So my understanding is the thing that's referred to in 2022 was an allocation of government funding, which had not yet been allocated. It was meant for the COVID. And it was in the end just distributed all out A to D regardless willy-nilly. So I think it's important that we make sure that doesn't happen again. That funds for vulnerable households are not sat upon and then at the last minute have to be put out in a blanket fashion that may or may not target those most in need.
Okay, well, we can add that to those order.
I just have a curious question. Here it says sale of property to recover council tax debt. Do we do that? Sell people's properties to recover the council tax?
Looks like it.
With a court order.
Okay, all right. 20, 21. 22. 23.
The adoption of local list of building consent order for windows, that's quite significant and in terms of its balancing against conservation area requirements. And there's various bits of work being done by ESSA and other institutions to see how it can be done. The way it's written here is just
Do you want to scrutinise that one?
interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think, I mean, the only reason I'm hesitating is because I think I have looked at it and it's very good and pleased that it's coming in, so. Yeah, so, but yeah, if you could add it to the list and then at our next agenda planning meeting.
Yeah.
Planning meeting, we'll decide whether we bring it to committee or just look at it.
I think if you can do it, as long as it respects conservation areas and all that sort of stuff, then it's brilliant. Yeah, it's the very.
We've got some recommendations there, so we can move on to agenda item 10, which is our work programme. Any comments or thoughts on those, or is everyone happy with that?
I just want to thank Jackie for the work she's done with the budget committee, supporting budget making group. It's a lot of work in preparation for the stuff.
Yes. Good. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And that does just bring me to the next slide, that is very important for all of our committees, well, OSC included, but also the budget scrutiny. We really want to make a success of in having applying more expertise, sort of subject expertise this year. We've got lots of great recommendations from last year, but let's try and really apply some subject expertise and use the access to the officers to answer some detailed questions this year in this next round of meetings, so that when we come to the next OSC, we've got some really robust thoughts on the budget that we can pass on to the leadership team.
Can I add to that, I think that the job we did last year in February 3 set some big scale strategic objectives. And I think what we now need to do is to make sure that implementation is carried out and monitored. Because my sense is that we've got about 18 months to go before the really big budget transformation's got to happen. And therefore, those strategic changes that were suggested in February need to make progress at pace. And we've already had an update report now. We ought to get update reports progressively. The subject area expertise and select committees will be able to add flesh to the bones on.
Oh, thank you. So if there's no other urgent business, I meeting's closed, and thank you very much for your contributions this evening.